Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm very happy to welcome you to today's event on how to improve the implementation of biodiversity targets through participatory approach methods. This is, of course, a very timely discussion, as this year we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Habitats Directive, and also we can step on the recently developed European Commission criteria and guidance to reach the 30 by 30 target of the EU biodiversity strategy. So as the post-2020 framework needs to additionally consider the interconnected effects of biodiversity conservation on human health and well-being, social justice and gender equity, enhancing the ownership of the biodiversity targets from stakeholders has a great potential in boosting their implementation, both at an EU, but also at an international level. And in this context, research of the Envision project can provide some key guidance, as we will be hearing more about this in the next 1 hour and a half to follow. So before we kick off, I would like to take the opportunity to thank hosting MEP Ms. Deparnay-Grunenberg for hosting this event under the umbrella of the Intergroup, as well as colleagues from the Envision project and IUCN Brussels office for kindly co-organizing this webinar. I would also like to let our audience know that as we were made aware that the MEP is connecting with a slight delay due to an unforeseen development in her agenda, I will provide a fresh twist in the plots, and I will just provide the floor to Professor Christopher Raymond, who is the project coordinator of the Envision, aiming at developing an inclusive approach to conservation involving diverse stakeholder visions for protected areas management in Europe and also in the United States. Mr. Raymond, moreover, is a guest professor at the Department of Landscape Architecture, Planning and Management at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. So it's a pleasure, Professor Christopher, to have you with us today. Just prior to passing the floor to you, I would like to also inform our audience that today's panel discussion to follow will be moderated by Mr. Alberto Arroyo Schnell, who is the Head of Policy and Program within IUCN European Regional Office. So as we will be hearing more from our audience as well, just a final reminder, so participants can send your questions during the platform. For that, you can use the Q&As box. You can choose the all panelists option. And within your question, please make sure to also note the speaker to whom your question is best addressed, so that on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. And with no further ado, Professor Raymond, the floor is yours. I think you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you, Elias, for that welcome, and welcome everyone to this event. I'm just going to share my screen. And put this on screen share. And okay, hopefully you can see that properly now. So yes, I'm going to introduce the Envision project, which I've been coordinating for the past couple of years. The Envision project is all about trying to develop a more inclusive approach to conservation, recognizing that we have to balance diverse visions for protected area management. And as Elias mentioned, not only biodiversity goals, but increasingly equity and other forms of inclusion goals. But I'm going to provide a little context to start with. We all know that protected areas are impacted by multiple pressures, whether it be indigenous use of natural resources, forestry, climate change, mining, different forms of governance, water resource planning, invasive species, land use change, tourism, etc. And the question is, how do you actually balance these different uses in ways that best protect biodiversity and enhance biodiversity, but also support human well-being? traditionally, at least in Europe, the Birds and Habitat Directive provided a lot of the background to protected area management, and it was been criticised for, in fact, not actively engaging different landholders in the management of protected areas. So we've had excellent designations, but there's been an issue around how do we actually engage managers in their management, in their conservation. But importantly, what we're seeing now in the post-2020 biodiversity framework is that there are not only targets about area-based conservation, but also about inclusive and equitable governance outcomes. And that's shown in the post-2020 targets, such as equitable sharing of nature's benefits, target 13, and ensuring equitable and effective biodiversity decision-making, target 21. And so in the Envision project, we've been very interested in how do we better balance the economic targets and goals of protected area management together with the social goals and targets and the environmental goals. And with a view of trying to connect people to the development of protected area policies and practices, as well as improving biodiversity and human well-being. And we use this tree or this infographic as a way to describe our approach. We've developed a range of methods for considering different visions for protected area management, ranging from local landholders through to expert visions for protected area management. We've then looked at ways to assess the consequences of each of these visions for biodiversity as well as human well-being and equitable governance. And then we developed different learning platforms to help different stakeholders learn about the consequences of these different visions, and recognizing that there is uncertainties in how we can manage for these different visions on the landscape in the light of environmental change, and also acknowledging that there are power relations embedded in these different visions, in that different groups and different people have different interests and needs in terms of protected area management. And then as we're here today, all these different processes are designed to inform biodiversity and protected area management policy, not only in Europe, but also globally. And we've been testing and applying our methods in 4 cases on a gradient from urban to wilderness. The urban case being near Kromme in Utrecht, the Netherlands. Vasterhaag is an agricultural landscape and forestry landscape near Sweden. Then we've had the Sierra de Guatemala area of Spain. And finally, the wilderness area of Denali National Park in Alaska. And in terms of our multiple methods, we don't have time to go through all the methods today, but just to say that we've brought together new methods around social network analysis to identify different stakeholders and their interests around protected area management. We've looked at different envisioning techniques, including a cartoon envisioning technique named Streamline, which is also pictured on the screen here, where we and use cartoons as a way to elicit different stakeholder visions for protected area management. Participatory mapping enables us to identify and map different values from a local community perspective. We've looked at the use of mental, emotional, and power mapping as a way to look at the different power relations between stakeholders, interviews, surveys, and deliberative processes where we're trying to foster social learning about the consequences of different visions for protected area management. But I suppose what I want to get to today, some of the more policy relevant findings, and they're coming out very shortly in a One Earth paper that's currently in press. And what we basically say that inclusive conservation is not easy. I mean, there are inherent tensions in looking at this concept in practice. And in this paper, we talk about 4 big tensions, and there are many others. In fact, like, for example, there are scale mismatches in terms of how we manage the protected areas. The interest at the very local scale may be different to the interests at the regional or indeed at the national scale. And how do we actually manage between different sectors that have different scales of governance interest is a key challenge. We also have challenges regarding what do we manage for on the landscape? Do we manage for a diversity of values or plural values, or do we manage for a dominant set of values or indeed an optimized set of values on the landscape? There are no easy answers there. Increasingly, we're also having to deal with multiple knowledge systems, not only Indigenous and local knowledge, but different forms of scientific knowledge. And the question then becomes, how do we start to validate these different knowledge systems, recognizing that different groups don't necessarily want their knowledge validated by other knowledge systems? And of course, how do we actually deal with different power relations, not only relations between different local actors, but between local citizens and the state, between the state and pan-European actors like the European Commission, etc. Are all challenges that we have to deal with when we're trying to have inclusive approaches to conservation. But what we found in our project is that it's possible to start to soften these tensions by not only developing multiple methods, but applying them in collaborative ways with diverse stakeholders. And this involves supporting different types of boundary organisations that can sort of bridge different interests for protected area management. It can be about creating spaces for values to be discussed on equal footing, recognising that there are different interests at play. It also can be about creating space for learning about protected area management from a position of consensus, but also a position of dissensus. And then how do we translate, synthesize, and apply multiple knowledge is something that we've looked at a lot in our work. And that by not only talking about different values or plural values, but looking at translating these values into things that are understood by local people, we can start to address some of the conflicts in protected area management. And so essentially what we're talking about is the need to reframe tensions through an emphasis on forging new partnerships. And we talk about this partnership wheel of reframing the problem across different knowledge systems, supporting critical reflection about the tensions in protected area management, supporting dialogues that enable both within knowledge validation and cross-knowledge exchange, acknowledging the social learning that has occurred during the process, inviting repositioning of previous dichotomies, whether it be dichotomies in values or dichotomies in interests, and then with co-creating protected area management strategies aligned with those refined positions. So what does this really mean for policy? And I'm going to talk about three things that stem from this process. And I think what we found in Vision, or certainly what we found in Vision, is the need to effectively involve local communities, Indigenous people, government, business, and NGOs in the management and in the designation process of protected areas. And this not only means recognising issues of environmental justice, but issues of gender equality, women's empowerment, gender-responsive approaches, and the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We need to create space for dialogues and social learnings, so moving away from merely optimizing for multiple functions on the landscape to really learning about the consequences of those different functions and the risks and opportunities associated with implementing them. And what we found in our work is that these dialogues can start to shift values among communities and promote behaviours to eliminate unsustainable consumption patterns, as well as create an understanding and appreciation of biodiversity. And thirdly, we need to be promoting the use of creative engagement tools to inform conservation decision making. This includes things like mental, emotional, and power maps that represent different interests, and we found them to be innovative and complementary tools to deal with less addressed topics in participatory approaches. So I'm recognising quite short of time today, but you can find out more about the Envision project and also a number of policy briefs on our work at www.inclusive-conservation.org. You also can find a range of our solutions on the Panorama Solutions database. And I finally should just thank our funders, particularly Belmont Forum and Biodiversa, who funded our work in partnership with national funders. And today really represents a final synthesis of our project, but we welcome further discussion after this workshop and into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for such an interesting presentation of the Envision project, its vision, methodology, challenges, and also key takeaways for policymakers. I am sure that we will be hearing more about these and also on the science policy interface as we progress. And on this note, I'm very happy to provide the floor to MEP Anna de Parnay-Grunenberg, who is a German member of the European Parliament for the Group of Greens and host of today's event. Ms. Anna de Parnay-Grunenberg is inter alia a member of the Committee on Transport and Tourism and also a substitute member for the Committee on Agriculture, but also the Environment. So without further ado, thank you very much, Ms. de Parnay-Grunenberg, for being with us today, for hosting this event under the European Parliament Intergroup, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, and welcome with a few minutes later to this webinar, and for all this presentation, really interesting one, and thank you very much to the wonderful team of EUCN for the organization, and of course we are all shocked about what is happening today in Ukraine, and that was the reason why I had some last meeting and internally to have a look on what we can do in this really frightening situation. And we all know that stability and sovereignty is a primary condition to tackle the big challenges of our time. And of course, in times of war, violation of fundamental rights and suffering of local communities, a fair and just use of resources and neither protection of biodiversity is possible. So it's a really it's an incredible day for all of us, and thank you very much to be here. And at the end, we know that our well-being, our health and wealth as human and as society, they are all interconnected with nature. Healthy food and our healthy bodies, clean air, fresh water, as well as our culture and also our narratives about our human needs. Our digital or technological organizations as a society, they are interconnected in depth with our energy systems, our digitalization, and of course with the raw materials, and at the end with Mother Earth. So nature and biodiversity make life possible. That's the base of everything. And of course, the natural ecosystem and their vital services, we know it, are under pressure today. And at the beginning, intensive agriculture, urban sprawl, pollution, invasive species, climate change, of course, you mentioned all this factor already. We need common action and new ideas also as a human society, as cultural product, organizing ourselves to preserve the biodiversity and the functioning ecosystems. And the current environmental crisis is, together, of course, with the climate crisis, is one of the greatest challenge we are facing. And I'm really pleased to see that you are not only just describing what we want to preserve and why, but also how we are going as a human society be able to look at all these different needs and maybe different culture and different bubble of our society to come together and to preserve and to protect our ecosystem in the so-called Anthropocene. I have seen a real interesting example in the last days. For instance, with the Habitat Directive, that is one of the key legal instruments which form the backbone of biodiversity policy in the EU. And we have seen that with the topic of the wolves coming back is a really typical example. All about all the wolves protection is accepted now in Europe, but we see that, for instance, peasants and agriculture are not so happy in sometimes when the pressure is getting higher. And so that's really, for me, a typical way when we are not working together on this, we're not going to protect the whole ecosystem, because the wolf has its place in Europe. I'm sure of that. And we, as a human, cannot decide, oh no, this animal we don't want. We prefer tigers and other big predators somewhere in the world, but no, in our landscape, the wolves is too dangerous or too cost intensive or whatever. And we have really seen that when we are working together with science, providing a lot of information how these animals are, and not the super positive narrative, and neither the really bad image of the wolf, but we're really close to the science, looking at facts, at behavior facts. And if we are coming to the sheepers and explaining them, and of course coming also with financial and administrative help to compensation when accident happens, we see that the community is much more able to be together to protect the ecosystem, and also knowing that the wolves are going to down the pressure of the cervidae, and so maybe protect also the nature close forest. And that's a really interesting when you have education and you have administration and science working together, that you can go towards big steps in conservation. That's what a really clear example as I saw. So I'm really happy to be here today to be the host of these events. And yeah, inclusive conservation can really be a powerful tool to support policymakers in better understanding the stakeholders and the participation in conservation governments, and monitor also all these participatory practices in order to promote the changes and we need towards this more inclusive conservation approaches. So thank you very much to present us Envision, and yeah, to have brought this to life. And the challenge is huge. The tasks are demanding, but yet only if we tackle them together, we have a chance of changing things at the long term and ensuring our survival on this beautiful planet. So thank you very much. And yeah, and my apologies again being late and a little bit emotional today.
Thank you very much, Ms. De Parne-Grunenberg, for setting the scene with regards to today's event and the discussion to follow. And actually, I'm very happy to, at this stage, on behalf of the Secretariat of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, introduce to you the moderator of the panel discussion to follow, and that is Mr. Alberto Arroyo-Schnell, who is Head of Policy and Program at the European Regional Office of IUCN. His current focus includes working together with the key sectors relating to benefiting from biodiversity and nature, also aiming to find ways to achieve the environmental targets jointly, and as well as to ensure ownership of these targets by all stakeholders. So on this note, thank you very much, Alberto, for being with us today, and the floor is yours for introducing the speakers and moderating the discussion to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elias. Let me start echoing anyway the words of Anna, and our hearts and our thoughts are with the people from the Ukraine. It's really a hard day, I have to say. We need to move ahead, and the discussions about biodiversity and other issues that now might seem small compared with what is happening, they are still necessary. So we're going to move ahead also for the sake of ensuring a better world for the future, which is at the very end what we all want. So anyway, as Elias was saying, my name is Alberto Arroyo-Schnell, and I'm going to help with the moderation of the discussion today here. This is a discussion about inclusivity, about inclusive conservation. Therefore, we want to walk the talk, and therefore we want to provide as many as possible opportunities for interaction during this discussion. And in this context, I would like to introduce you to a tool we are going to use during the next 1 hour, more or less. It's Slido. I think that maybe my colleague can share the screen and show what is going to be the way that we will deal with it. We will have some questions during the discussion that will help understand a little bit better what is in your mind. In any case, of course, during the whole discussion, please feel free to add questions in the Q&A box that you have there on your available in the chat of this conversation. So now you can see, I hope, the screen in front of you, and you can see the Slido, as I mentioned. It's very easy to connect to it. It's you only need to use the QR code or go to www.slido.com and use the code number that you have there in your screen, 046433. With this, and maybe I leave it a little bit there because it has just been shown, so you can have the opportunity to use your phone to connect through the QR code or to connect to slido.com with this code that you have in front of you. And I would like to go now to the first question that we have. It's just to have some understanding of the audience, of who is connecting with us today. And this first question is only going to ask you, from where are you joining us today? As you see in the screen, you will only have to answer which continent do you belong to. You will also see there Antarctica, actually, because as you said, we want to have an inclusive discussion today, and we don't exclude the possibility to have somebody from Antarctica. In the meanwhile, anyway, let me introduce quickly the panelists today. We have a very exciting and very interesting panel today. Maybe I could ask our panelists to switch on the cameras now. We will have today with us Christopher Raymond, who has already been telling us a little bit about the Envision project. He's the Envision project coordinator, and you already know him. Thank you very much for being with us today, Chris. Secondly, we have David Reynolds, who is the president of the George Wright Society and the regional focal point of the World Commission on Protected Areas for the United States. He's actually bringing 37 years experience in the National Park Service in the US, and is also a member of the executive committee of the IUCN US. So we have very good experience coming from the other side, if you want. We are very used to have discussions about the European Union context. It's good to have this voice today. We also have today here with us Erika Stanciu, who is the World Commission on Protected Areas European Regional Vice Chair. And in the past, he was Secretary of State for Forest in the Ministry of Environment, Water and Forest from Romania. She was also the president from Europark, and he has a long experience directly on protected areas management. So again, very good experience coming also directly from the field. And finally, we have here with us also Joseph van der Stegen, who is working in the Nature Conservation Unit of the Directorate General for the Environment of the European Commission. He is in charge of files related with the implementation of the Birds and Habitats Directive, of course, in the context of the biodiversity strategy. And before working for the Commission, he was leading the service coordinating the environmental and agricultural policies for the Walloon region of Belgium. And previously, he was in charge of management of public nature reserves and forests in southern Belgium. So again, very good experience from the field and also from the policy side. Now, before we start with the first question to our panelists, let's show maybe the results from the first question, if that's possible, Barbara, just to have an understanding of where our audience is coming from. As I saw anyway before we were stopping showing the screen, most of our audience is coming from Europe, which is expected. Well, 100%, that's really impressive. It means that all of our audience is coming from Europe, at least the ones that have answered to the consultation, by the way, because there are much more participants, 86 participants, and only 40 have answered to the consultation. So we can assume that a large number of the ones that have not answered are anyway coming from other regions of the world. This said, let's start, as I said, with the first question, and I would like to go directly to the policy side, to Joseph from the European Commission. Joseph, there is a very recent guidance from the European Commission. This is the guidance on protected areas. Now, how does the European Commission intend to achieve the EU biodiversity targets, among others related with protected areas, of course, and address the challenge in particular of the lack of ownership of biodiversity targets, which has been an issue in the past in relation with the implementation of the biodiversity targets? Joseph, the floor is yours.
No. Ole, yes. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And before starting answering your question, I will just recall maybe where we are. I mean, very briefly, of course, in the EU, you are all aware that we have a strong legal framework. We have the Birds and the Habitats Directive that have already been mentioned. We have the Natura 2000 network, which covers 18% of the EU. This is quite impressive, and I think we have had already quite impressive results. But we all know that we are far from where we want to go. we haven't reached the objectives or the final objectives of the Birds and the Habitats Directive, and we are aware there are still degradations going on. So we need to do no more, and the Commission is well aware of that. And for that, we need to speed up the implementation of the Birds and the Habitats Directive, and that's the main objective of the EU biodiversity strategy. And in the context of the new EU biodiversity strategy, we have, as just said by you, we have taken, important initiatives like the objectives of reaching 30% of protected areas within the EU. We want also to improve the status of protected habitats and species more quicker than before. And we also aim to produce very soon, by the way, a nature restoration law with legally binding targets. So we have high ambitions and higher challenges than before. So how shall we do? Of course, the Commission is a bit a special institution. Its first interlocutors are the member states. So we work with member states, and in a way, we have a participatory approach with the member states. And of course, this we need to support the member states, and that's why we produce guidances. And we have just mentioned the guidance on protected areas. And in this guidance, we insist very much on the importance of involving stakeholders. So this is a message for member states to tell them that for reaching those biodiversity targets, it's really important to involve the stakeholders. So a participatory approach is necessary at different level, at EU level, and we will do that with stakeholders also and member states at EU level, but also at national and local level, it's also very important. And we know that we will not reach our objectives if we don't have the people owning the land, managing the land, living on the land on board. So we should involve the authorities, but not only the environmental authorities, the agricultural authorities, all the authorities concerned by nature. We need to involve the NGOs, the citizens, the scientists, the landowners, the land users. And what can we do to foster a participatory approach? I think there are several things to do, and at different levels, as just said, be it by the Commission or other levels. I think it's really important to first inform about nature and biodiversity, because just understanding the need to preserve biodiversity is important, and also to insist on the ecosystem services. What are the benefits that nature brings to people? Because it's important that the people understand that the farmers benefit from nature, but that also nature, that the farmers need nature for his activity. And this is not always well understood, because people think that if you use the land, you degrade the land. That's not always the case, or on the contrary. Then, beyond information, dialogue, as already said, is key. Consultation, and we very much encourage member states to put in place consultation process with all people involved. And consultation is not just having people around the table, it's really listening to the needs of the different people before deciding. And then there are also tools. Mr. Raymond has already mentioned some which are beyond my knowledge, but tools like citizen sites are very important, because it's a way also to involve the people. Also, volunteering schemes is an easy way and effective way to involve the youth in conservation actions. And the last but not least, I would like to insist on the need to build partnerships, because there are many people who share the same objectives, but they have different visions for nature. And if you build partnerships between an NGO and a landowner or a farmer, then you can achieve a lot, because you will foster mutual understanding. And that will happen on the ground, and it's really necessary. Then we can ask whether there is not still something missing. Actually, nature conservation policies have been very much triggered by the top level because there was a need, and has been very much promoted by NGOs and the authorities and scientists. But the people living on the ground have not always been fully involved in the design or in the implementation of the policies. So we think that there is also a need to develop bottom-up approach in which will complement the top-down approaches. And in the Commission, we think, and it's important also to foster voluntary contributions to nature. And for instance, landowners, land users can voluntarily contribute to nature via different tools. And this is the reason why the Commission is supporting a live project, which is called the EU Network for Private Land Conservation. And it's a live project where NGOs and representative for landowners and land users work together to see how to contribute on a voluntary basis to nature. So in conclusion, I would like to insist on really the need to have a participatory approach. This is really important, and we have already said that, but we need to do better, to invest in communication, to raise the awareness on the need to protect nature, but also on the benefits of nature for all, to foster mutual understanding. It's important to promote dialogue, and this needs to happen at different levels. And it's also very useful to build partnerships between people who are not used to work together. And also, if we can promote voluntary contributions to nature and provide the right tools to do that, and I can expand on that later if needed, that's also very helpful. So I thank you, and I'm happy to share ideas with the colleagues.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It's very encouraging to see the importance that the Commission is giving to this issue of inclusivity and participation of stakeholders. You can see it clearly actually in the easy guidance that was mentioned before. In the ever-evolving discussion on protected areas, this is always one of the important points, the participation. Now, I would like to turn to Erika, who, as I said before, has been in the protected areas business for quite a while now. And I would like to ask you, how do you see the evolution of the change in relation with the protection of the management of the protected areas in Europe during the past years? And what do you think that still will need to change? In particular, do you see a role for inclusive conservation in protected areas management in future? Erika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Well, if you ask me about how the protected area management changed in the past few years, that's a very complex question. I don't think I dared even to refer to how protected area management changed. But if I'm allowed to refer to the inclusive conservation approach, I would like to think that Europe or protected area managers in Europe are thinking about participatory management and considering participatory management very important for decades now. I've started my protected area work with a mentor, Mike Appleton, who said from the very beginning, almost 20 years ago, protected area management has to be participatory and adaptive if you want to be successful in achieving the objectives. And I think that's in the mind of most protected area managers in Europe. So at least at the theoretical level, we like to think that Europe is a Europe speciality to manage participatory protected areas. But from the theory to the practice on the ground, especially, a long way. And yes, there are many changes. There were many changes, especially I think in the western part of Europe, where protected area managers started to learn how to do participation. And I've seen very good processes of involving, which allowed stakeholders to get involved in the management, not necessarily in the designation, but even that is happening. Designation is also becoming more participatory. However, I think that one of the key triggers in putting participatory approaches, or as you say now, inclusive conservation up on the agenda of protected area management, I think a key trigger was the Natura 2000 network. even though at the beginning we tried to avoid in Europe the word associate Natura 2000 sites with protected areas, we all know that these are protected areas, and we are acknowledging this now. And Natura 2000 sites are challenging, perhaps much more challenging than the practical, so to say, protected areas designated as for national interest. So we had to learn, especially in the past few years, that we cannot be successful with Natura 2000 without the stakeholders. So I'm just re-emphasizing this. However, the process is slow. I do not have, unfortunately, figures, or I do not know about studies that looked into how efficient participation is at the European level. But we did have the small organization where I'm working now, ProPark in Romania, with support with the German Federal Ministry for Environment. We had a study in Eastern and Central Europe some 7 years ago. And it was really good to see that this block of countries that was and is to a certain extent in nature conservation still quite centralized. There is an obvious movement towards delegated management, which means that governments are open and ready in some countries to delegate management of protected areas to some of the key stakeholders. And this is happening also in the country where I live now. But also moving in some countries, there are examples of moving to joint management or even private management. And we've seen in this study wonderful case studies where even if the country did not get to the point to have a legal framework to allow participatory management or to promote participatory and encourage participatory management, so de jure, for protected area managers, there is no clear framework on how to do this. However, de facto, it is happening. Protected area managers or responsible authorities feel the need to have stakeholders next to them when they have to decide about protected area management and management approaches. Of course, there are very few examples of good participation. And we were wondering in our studies, why is this happening? And of course, we all know. But I would like to highlight that the de facto participation, participatory management, needs a few things in place. So needs, of course, a legal framework. Governments have to accept and have to encourage participation by allowing it in some countries. Some countries don't even have that. It needs also very skilled managers who are skilled not in biodiversity conservation, because that's in place, of course, with all of the protected areas, but skilled in working with people, with stakeholders, in facilitating discussions, in listening and involving stakeholders in making decisions in the protected areas. This is a skill which is quite rare, I think. That's my personal experience, that here we have still a lot to learn. And also, I think we need to improve. I mean, we need support from the funding entities, including the European Commission, for financial support for improving governance of protected areas. You can see now, if you look to the funding streams, it's about, of course, bioconservation measures, restoration, communication, which is, of course, an important contributor to participation. But very seldom funding lines encourage projects that will help participation de facto. I mean, really. So there are quite a few ingredients that are still needed, but I think that nowadays protected area managers and the authorities are very aware of the need of having inclusive conservation. And I'm optimistic that we slowly move from centralized governance of protected areas, which is still the majority approach for the majority of protected areas, towards delegated and even more joint and private governance and management for protected areas. So I hope this will happen.
Thank you very much, Erika, for this insight. As I said, full of experience and also giving a little bit of the perspective of what has happened and where we are now. So inclusive conservation clearly has a role and has a future and is necessary, actually. I think that we can definitely say that. Before I move on with the next speaker, I would like to remind everybody that there is a possibility to write questions in the Q&A box. We already have a number of them, but please feel free to continue adding them. And also, I would like to remind that we still have the slide ongoing, and there is a second question that is possible to answer now. And it's a very general one, but again, it might be giving us some interesting information about what participants in this discussion today thinks about the protected areas. The question is very general. What is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of protected areas? So please feel free to answer to this question in the Slido as it was introduced before. And this said, now we are speaking mainly about Europe, but of course there are much more realities, and in particular there is a very interesting one that we would like to discuss about today in relation with the US. I think that we are all aware, or I hope that everybody is aware, that President Biden has committed relatively recently to conserve, connect, and restore 30% of US land and waters by 2030 for the sake of Americans' economy and its people's health and well-being. I'm reading the goal, how it's formulated. Well, this is very similar to the 30 by 30 target, although the US has not ratified the CBD, as we know. But anyway, it will be very good to hear from you, David. What are some ways the US and Europe can work together to advance in this conservation target? David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alberto. And before I go into that, I just wanted to echo your words about the situation in Ukraine right now. And I just want to say our hearts really go out to the people of Ukraine and those of you who have friends and family there. We're all dealing with that right now. I would say that there are three general ways that the US and Europe can work together to achieve and advance the 30 by 30 targets. It's no accident that I think the president has created the 30 by 30, and it's very similar to the CBD goals. The three ways, general ways, are to basically share plans to achieve conservation targets. Second way is to exchange information on new and existing collaborative programs that already are working. And then the third is to build institutional capacity through strengthening existing direct personal relationships between protected areas or between protected area institutions, and then creating new relationships between European and US land and water stewards. And this is on all levels, not just government to government, but it can be local person to local group. It could be city government to city government. Let me give you some examples here. The Biden administration will be producing two different kinds of updates and information that they'll post online on an annual basis. One of the updates will have progress on the areas of collaboration. It will have an assessment of land cover changes, including loss of open space. And then it will review the habitat loss or gains. Just so you all know, the Biden administration has renamed the 30 by 30 initiative, and he's calling it the America the Beautiful initiative, which I think politically sounds better here in the U.S. It's essentially an expansion of an executive order that the administration, that President Biden signed, called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. So this 30 by 30 plan promotes collaborative and voluntary conservation efforts on working lands, on tribal lands, and then state, local, and private lands. So Secondly, the initiative will also share updates of an atlas that will be produced each year. And the atlas will track a clear baseline of information on lands and waters that already have been conserved or restored, and will measure the progress of conservation and stewardship, restoration efforts across the US. So those two annual updates should provide really useful information to European countries on how data are collected and displayed for the purpose of tracking for 30 by 30 goals. And then also states are developing their own 30 by 30 plans. California has one now that you can find online. California, as you know, is a large state. It's the largest economy of all the states in the US, and it's the same size as Germany. So this is significant in that the scale of the work that California is doing is the same scale as European countries, and it can be even more relevant. I did want to touch on the discussion that Christopher was having and how it's relevant to the Make America America the Beautiful initiative. Listening sessions have been held for the America the Beautiful initiative, where there were many contrasting views expressed and recorded. As you can imagine, you have ranchers and miners and fishers and tribal people talking about how is 30 by 30 going to happen, because they know it's not all going to happen through the federal government or even the state government. So it was clear to the people who were there that to be successful, the US will have to address the pain that was caused to parts of American society by creating protected areas. In other words, there were tribal nations that were dispossessed and indigenous people also of their lands by infringing on their subsistence rights. The US evicted private landowners to create national parks, particularly in the East, for example, in Shenandoah National Park and the Smoky Mountains. And they imposed segregationist policies on public lands and beaches. They ignored contributions of communities of color and underrepresented communities in the preservation of natural resources. So you can imagine why there's a little bit of, concern when people talk about 30 by 30. There's a history behind that, and people are wondering what that really means. So what it means to people who are working on this is that they have to make an extra effort to make sure that the persons controlling and managing the this effort are really the same people that have those concerns, the ranchers, the tribal people, indigenous folks as well. I think I'll end it there, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, David. And clearly we can see that the challenges are, for the good or for the bad, also the same in relation with the need to include all the different actors and stakeholders in the discussion related with protected area management in the US and in the European Union. Well, maybe a question that will be now directed to Chris. We are now having, because the question at the very end is how to address these challenges. And these times also when there is so much information or news that sometimes they are not really news, what science has to say. The Envision project, Chris, has sought the involvement of many researchers all over Europe and also in the US. How do you think this kind of project can help building a better science policy interface? Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alberto. So when I think about the Envision results and also my experience in IPBES and other science policy interfaces, what I see a need for is to move from discussions purely about community engagement, because it's such a big term, and public participation. We need to get a bit clearer about which public are we managing for, whose voices are counting, and building upon what David mentioned, who's going to lose out, and how do we put in Davidson, how do we recognise that pain, not only historic pain, but also future pain from people losing out in that process. And so what I'm trying to get to here, that in our quest to address not only biodiversity goals, but well-being goals and justice goals, there's still going to be winners and losers. And we need to be a lot more effective in the science policy interface of recognising who is going to win and lose in different contexts, and how we're going to manage that in ways that support, as best as we can, a collective sense of well-being. And that's something that science can partly do. It cannot solve. There are many different things that need to be considered here. I mean, in the Envision project, we tried to look at a range of different values and visions for protected area management, not only from local residents, but from businesses, from farmers, from local, regional, and even national governments. And we tried to develop new ways for combining those values and identifying trade-offs, and also ways of unlocking those trade-offs. But in some cases, there are limits to unlocking them, because no one policy or no one practical intervention can solve them. And so that's why we come back to this keyword of partnerships and dialogue, that we need new forms of dialogue to start to acknowledge that there are different conflicts and different interests at play. We have to be open to dissensus, not only consensus. And we also have to look at ways that we can start to reframe some of these futures in ways that diverse groups, including Indigenous communities, can benefit from. And this also aligns with the wider thoughts that are coming out of the Best Values Assessment, which will be published in July, that if we're going to start to recognize biodiversity and the plurality of values around nature, first of all, we need a reframing of what biodiversity means in the science policy interface. And second of all, we need to rethink what types of values we're managing for. And thirdly, how do we actually combine and integrate those values into different decision contexts? And so it's not only about mobilizing knowledge, it's about how do we synthesize and translate knowledge. It's about dealing with consensus and dissensus in the science policy interface. And I think the thing that we have not talked about today, that is the elephant in the room, we also have to think about how do we deal with these different values in an economic growth paradigm. Do we need a new paradigm through which we understand not only biodiversity conservation, but other goals that we're trying to achieve through the UN SDGs? So that's a very broad answer, Alberto. There's a lot of devil in the detail of the science, but that's some key thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Of course, one could think that also ideally we could try to prevent as much as possible, or avoid or compensate if necessary, the losers that you were mentioning, if that's the case. And also in terms of how to integrate the value of biodiversity in the economic discussion, there is a lot of discussion about natural capital accounting that could help, but we should go beyond that. And anyway, today we're discussing about inclusivity, which is a starting point to ensure that everybody is part of the discussion. Now, this said, I would like now, if possible, Barbara, to show the results from the second question, which, if you remember, was asking just about what comes to your mind when you think about protected areas, and to see what are the results we have there. And you see that, interestingly enough, there are three words there that are clearly highlighted there: biodiversity, nature, and stakeholders. It's interesting that is the third one, but it's still very interesting that is one of the top three ones, because as we are discussing today, is one of the fundamental ones to ensure that the conservation of protected areas really works, the management. Now, before I move ahead with the rest of the questions that we still have, and we have some in the chat actually, as I said, in the Q&A box, let me just remember that there will be a third question now that we'll come back to it at the end of this discussion. And the question is, would you agree that the current protected area management is enough inclusive? This is a very big question and it's open-ended, and it provides the opportunity to write much longer. So feel free to add what you think that is more interesting for you in the Slido, as you have the link already from the beginning. Now, this said, let's move with now some of the questions that we are receiving in our chat. And I'm going to start with the first question from Irene Holm, who asks how to consider, I will understand, constant change and global trends in local decisions making. I am thinking here of how to utilize the social and cultural values as these change faster than, say, biophysical changes, long term. An interesting question that actually I could assume that anybody in the panel could answer, but do let me know if you would like to intervene. Otherwise, I'm happy to direct it to somebody. Maybe actually, as this is a little bit related with a very practical experience, I will be happy to hear from Erika, if you have some opinion about this particular question.
Well, it is a very complex and complicated question, but just as from a practical point of view, just thinking on how it should happen, I think that here again, we need protected area managers who understand these constant change and global trends and are able to present and translate them to the local communities and the local stakeholders, and then start the dialogue on how to adapt to those by at the same time conserve the values that are for which the protected area was established. So that's really complicated, but again, I think that protected area managers, at least in my part of the world, do not have that skill. They don't have the time actually to follow what is happening at the global level. And here is where I think there should be something in place, and I don't know now immediately what should be that, would be that to inform them, to help them to be on the top of this flow of information about these changes, help them figure out what is relevant and how they can take the information to the local stakeholders and then analyze and see how to adapt what is there in their hands to the changes, or how they can respond to the changes. This needs lots of skills, lots of procedures. I know it sounds boring to speak about procedures, but that's how management should work, and lots of analysis. So yes, I think it should be done, but I don't think it's being done very consistently, and I think it's not done, not even in the management planning process in most protected areas. I would like to see, at least when the management plans are being developed in a participatory process, to have protected area managers having a chapter and quite some time allocated to this question. I don't know how many of the protected area managers have time and resources to do that. I'm not saying they don't want to. I'm just saying that they might not have the capacity and enough support to do so.
Thank you very much, Erika. And actually, this might link a little bit with the next question, because one of the points you're raising is the lack of, if you want, skills or at least information on how to do it from the protected areas management side. And there is a question here which is a little bit general, but might be helpful here in relation with, actually the question how it is who is engaged with the link research and practice. So who is trying to link these two, the knowledge and the practice at the very end. But maybe it's interesting to see and hear after what Erika was saying from your side, Chris, because you are coming from the academia, to understand how do you think that this could be addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. I suppose I'm being quite inspired by the IPBES processes on this through in my role as coordinating lead author of the IPBES values assessment. And what IPBES has done very well, and I know this is at an international level, but still I think it could be applied at different scales, is that they've developed a range of different knowledge task forces, including an Indigenous task force, a local knowledge task force, among other task forces are on different key areas of knowledge or key areas of need, and which have brought local insights, place-based perspectives into the science policy interface, so into the evidence base that researchers are collating through the literature, etc. And there's a formalized set of protocols and processes for doing this. And what that has resulted in is an assessment and a set of, I suppose, steps for biodiversity decision making, which not only considers the Western scientific literature, but explicitly considers case insights from different communities around the world. And so that we have a range of different knowledge systems coming together. And the question then is, how do you translate this global evidence base into local decisions? That's also in the values assessment. But I think coming back to the Envision project, it's also about developing these local dialogues where you can build trust and rapport among key people, not just key people, but among diverse stakeholders, so that those insights can be implemented at the local level. So yeah, I'm sort of reflecting off on two experiences here, but both I think have merit to how we go forward in this discussion.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, it is actually a question that is generating some conversation in the Q&A section, which is quite interesting. Maybe to move ahead, because it's also related with the policy setting at the very end. And there is a question that is related with it, also in relation with how these skills could be translated to the police protected area managers. It's a question from Silvia Skosavava. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Excuse me if not. What do you think of setting international standards for protected area managers, top level, of course, it's emphasized, that ensure that enough knowledge on natural and social issues, I understand, is provided? So I would say that this is a question maybe for Joseph from the Commission.
Yes, thank you, Alberto. I mean, there is a wide variety of protected area managers. So that's maybe a good idea for certain type of protected areas, like large public protected areas. But when it comes, for instance, to the Natura 2000 sites, actually each Natura 2000 site is a protected area. And on one Natura 2000 site, you might have, I mean, 15, 21, or just one or just two landowners or several land users. So, and you can't change them because they are there and they own the land and they use the land. So for them, you need to involve them by, I mean, informing them, involving them in dialogues and things like that. But we cannot impose a standard type of manager, because once again, there is no one manager per Natura 2000 site. And maybe this is something particular to the Natura 2000 sites, because that's different for national parks or regional parks, where you often have one manager. So to summarize, I think it's a good idea for some parks, but not for all. It's not possible. For the others, you need to find ways to involve the people, to inform them, and to have dialogues.
I agree with Joseph, but I do want to let the participants know that there is a competencies manual that was developed by WCPA that lists all the competencies for park professionals, all the way from the ranger all the way up to top level. So that's available online if you go on the WCPA web capacity development website.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that note. It's very well noted. The World Commission on Protected Areas is providing a number of tools that can be very helpful for protected area managers. And actually, maybe also using the opportunity that I have you now in the discussion, there is a question that is a little bit more general and more about the political discussion. It's about the CBD and the US. The US has not ratified the CBD, but how is the country protecting its biological diversity to meet the spirit of the CBD goals? That's a challenge, but maybe you can address it.
Sure. Well, you know, in general, I think one of the Let me say a couple ways. One is through funding conservation projects that are both local, state, by local, state, and federal government organizations. In other words, it shouldn't be the role of the federal government to fund all the projects for biological diversity. I mentioned the state of California is developing their own programs that address some of the very same goals that CBD has. But at the same time, the current administration is putting money into programs that do address many of these goals. Just a month ago, $1.5 billion was appropriated for funding outdoor recreational and wildlife habitat efforts and conservation efforts, and that's across the country. So that's another way they're doing it. But what happens is that money goes out to the states, who then in turn send it out to the local communities. So it's spread out and it's used in that way. And then they also put together a task force between the Western governors and the departments, U.S. departments of Interior, which contains the National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service, and the NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, to develop conservation programs so that the concerns of local ranchers and farmers are met. So it goes back to trying to involve all of the stakeholders that are involved. So to answer your question, I think in today's political climate, I don't think the chances of having the CBD ratified by the current Senate is good, but it still doesn't mean that many of the goals and the spirit of the CBD is not being pursued in a vigorous way, and it is with this administration.
Thank you very much. Encouraging to hear what is happening in the US, and encouraging also that there is a link with international discussion, as we said at the beginning. Yeah. We have a question for Erika, who has, as I said before, recently been appointed as the Regional Vice Chair for Europe for the World Commission on Protected Areas. And the question is, in your new position, how do you plan to support efforts to solve the challenges that still need to be addressed in protected area management? Erika, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm just in this planning process to figure out how WCPA Europe can support the European protected areas and not only the protected areas, but authorities who are in charge with biodiversity conservation to reach these ambitious goals from the various strategic documents. And of course, at the same time, look into the gaps we still have in protected area management, even without the new goals, and how we can help. And what I hope is that the WCPA membership experts, very experienced experts, will be keen to contribute by sharing, first of all, experience knowledge. I hope to have working groups on key topics. I'm just working now, speaking to various members to see what are the key topics considered by the membership, and then start perhaps working groups to assemble tools, information packages that can somehow supplement the lack of capacity of protected area managers, but especially who are often under-resourced and cannot do a lot of the work that protected area managers need, like information sharing, guiding protected area managers by telling them that there are tools in IUCN, in WCPA, which are developed based on very good experience, and it's no need to reinvent the wheel. We can share lots of resources, and it seems that it's in human nature to forget many of the things that were already developed with quite a lot of money and time and resources, and we tend to reinvent. So I hope that WCPA Europe can do something about reminding people about the good tools we have, offering experienced people to governments and protected area managers, offering experience and help to figure out solutions. I can go to the site level or protected area level. I think that's too much to ask from a voluntary network. But I'm sure we will figure out ways to reach out to governments. And of course, I do hope that IUCN and WCPA will consider the WCPA Europe expertise in the discussions with the Commission, because there are still quite a lot of uncertainties around the approaches, even some of the definitions in the various new documents, which are producing confusion. And if we don't want to just discuss again and again these confusions, perhaps the help of experts from WCPA will help clarify and then taking things to action. I just want to say, I hope that the setup and the role of WCPA is understood, and nobody expects us to have very concrete projects. Unfortunately, we can't. We do not have the resources for that. But I really hope that I can motivate people to offer their experience and voluntary time to help implementation or heading towards the implementation of the new ambitious goals. More concrete ways, I will know in about hopefully 3-4 weeks when this will be discussed with the membership. I didn't have to present myself to the membership, so these are just my thoughts and thoughts from a few people with whom I had a chance to discuss about the future of WCPA Europe.
Thank you very much, Erika. And actually, as a long-standing member of the WCPA myself, looking forward for this discussion. There has been a number of mentions of the EC, of the Commission's guidance, I will say. So maybe it's a good moment to refer to Joseph, and actually also another general question that also refers to the approach of the Commission. How do you think the European Union could promote a more inclusive approach in the designation and/or management of protected areas? Joseph, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Alberto. But for as regards the further designation of protected areas, so we have produced this guidance document, but we have planned, meetings in the future. And so the member states are supposed to provide their preliminary ideas by the end of the year. But then next year in 2030, we will have the so-called geographical process where the member states and the stakeholders, and I guess IUCN can be also involved, and where the pledges by the member states will be discussed. But questions of understanding and principles will also be discussed in this context. So, there will be a forum for discussion, for better understanding, and then for finally looking at concrete proposals by the member states. And again, on participation, as said in the guidance, we very much encourage member states to have a participatory approach in the member states. It's not a void word. It should really happen on the ground. And then maybe also to come back to something I already said, but further exploring voluntary contributions to nature and to protected areas, even on designation, is a way to explore probably. And just to mention that Finland has a system where the additional protected areas will be designated, will be mostly designated on a voluntary basis according to a national scheme. So the landowners can propose their own land as a protected area, and they will be compensated for that. Of course, there is a cost, and I'm sure that the Professor Raymond is fully aware of these projects. But this bottom-up approach for reaching the biodiversity targets is certainly interesting. So yes, and I saw a question on the chat about please share good experience or something like this on participatory projects. I might mention maybe a project that the EU funded. It was not a live project. And by the way, it was also funded by the Parliament on wolf management in Italy. We have with the Parliament, we have funded the regional platforms for the coexistence of large carnivores and people. And in one of the provinces in Italy, Grosseto, and I can share the link if you like, there was a very good project of dialogue between people, all people, to try to solve conflict as much as possible. That's just an example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And actually, I was coming back to that question. Actually, there is a number of comments actually related with the projects that could be shared, information from other projects, and in particular also working groups from the Envision project. Yes, there have been a number of discussions during the past years, actually, in relation with the implementation of the Envision project, and there is good experience. And this comes back maybe to a question that I would like to ask also to Chris here as representative of the Envision project. How do you think Envision's inclusive conservation approach can help the implementation of the biodiversity targets, which is ultimately the goal? Chris, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. It probably links back to what I shared in my presentation earlier, that inclusive conservation in the context of Envision and indeed aligning with the post-2020 framework is looking about how do we somehow converge goals around biodiversity, well-being, and equity and justice. And that means working with stakeholders, well, not only having science to diagnose and elicit these different values, but also working with stakeholders to manage potential conflicts, trade-offs, and power relations. And we developed a range of methods in Envision to do that. And so what does this really mean going forward in terms of the how of inclusive conservation? It really means, in my view, that we have to better have a more nuanced understanding of participatory engagement, which is not only about involving different communities, but it requires new approaches to partnership building. It requires new approaches to conflict management and conflict identification and management. It requires also new approaches to reframing challenges and reframing problems and identifying new solutions together through social learning environments. And I think we did this really well in the Denali case, where we, over a period of 2 years, we worked with Indigenous communities, with other local residents, with protected area managers, with the regional and even national government to think about how do we support inclusive conservation in Denali. And we build a shared understanding of these different visions and also new ways for managing those visions going forward, which I think it serves as a nice model for what we could do in other areas of the world in terms of not only achieving the 30% targets, but also bringing in these well-being, equity, and justice outcomes. So thanks, Alberto.
Thank you very much. That was a very good way to start to think in closing this event, because we are getting to the end of the time that was foreseen. Now, before closing, I would like to share the information about the last question that was made in the slide, and maybe Barbara, you can share the screen to see what has happened. Probably here we have a lot of different pieces of information. So I'm going to read it with you. As you see, remember the question was, would you agree that the current protected area management is enough inclusive? And here we have the first answer. Protection and management measures plans should be always decided on a side-by-side basis and in a participatory approach. I think we can all agree with that. Second answer, no, directly. In many cases, biodiversity could benefit from traditional management for which the local community is crucial. And in some cases, it may need to be more exclusive. For example, keeping out detrimental impact. without discussion. The third answer is also starting with a clear no. Still a lot to do. Local communities are informed and listened to, but their complaints, suggestions are not effectively included, and they also do not take an equal role in the decision process. And finally, a fourth answer that is a simple, clear no. There are more answers, excuse me. Still, there is more coming. More regards for indigenous communities is needed. There is more to be done, but it works quite well. Needs to be adapted to the local circumstances. A clear no, and I think more no, a very strong no. Yes, well, that's one diverging opinion here, and a lot of no's. Maybe we can stop here in case there are more questions or more answers. They are long. That should be enough for now. So with this, anyway, this has been a very, I think, interesting discussion. I hope also inclusive enough, as that was the goal also from the start. I would like to thank very much MEP Anna de Parnier-Grunenberg for hosting the event today, and of course our colleagues from the Intergroup Secretariat for having hosted and organized this event together with us. Thank you very much for our speakers for this fruitful discussion, and also thank you to all the participants for joining us today. There will be a summary, a note from this discussion that will be published in the Intergroup webpage, and also in the IUCN webpage, and also in the Inclusive Conservation webpage of Envision. So with this, I hand over to Elias to close the event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for moderating today's discussion in such an interactive and stimulating manner, as well as providing the remarks at the end, so very much to the point. I would also like to thank Ms. de Parnier-Grunenberg for kindly hosting this event, as well as colleagues from the Envision project and all colleagues from the IUCN European Regional Office for kindly co-organizing this event today. I would also like to thank, last but not least, all speakers and viewers of this webinar for their active engagement today, addressing how to improve the implementation of biodiversity targets through participatory approach methods. So, as we're wrapping up today's webinar on behalf of the Secretariat of the EP Intergroup as well, very much looking forward to continuing the discussion in the future. So until then, stay safe and see you next time, hopefully, should conditions allow, also in person, hopefully soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.